And they say, well, if you're going to count the slaves, count them as 3/5. That's where that term comes from.
3/5. You're right. You got it right.
So it's Southern strategy.
Oh, you're telling the truth.
This was a Southern strategy to put in the minds of white Southerners that black people, slaves, black people, even free slaves, free blacks, they will steal from you. They will rape your daughter. So they put this, they didn't have internet then. They didn't have TV then.
That's right, that's right.
They just had word of mouth and written paper. And they spread the word that black people were criminals. And so they could get the vote from the white Southerners. So in criminalizing the race, it's about changing the mindset and the perception of people toward that race. And this is what's happening. See? And so when you come into after slavery, we talk about, well, let's back up a little bit. Abraham Lincoln, he decided to write what you call the Emancipation Proclamation. You know, to emancipate black people and proclaim that they should be considered citizens. He signed this paper in 1865, and it wasn't really worth nothing but a piece of paper. But just like today, our President Barack Obama has to pass things through Congress. So did Abraham Lincoln. So he signed this in 1862. It didn't pass Congress until 1865. And so the Emancipation Proclamation became the 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution. And that amendment suggests that no person of U.S. citizenship should be subject to slavery or indentured servitude. Let me stop right there. Indentured servitude were the white convicts that were shipped over here from Europe to work off their prison sentence as slaves, free labor. So he had to add that in there because they started adopting that system here, and they had indentured servants here. So the 13th Amendment suggests that no person of U.S. citizenship should be subject to slavery or indentured servitude, and hear this, unless otherwise convicted of a crime. Meaning if you are convicted of a crime, they can put you back in the state of a slave. And so when they passed the 13th Amendment and the so-called slaves was freed, they came up with new laws. One of them was called vagrancy law. What that mean was, if you didn't have your own place to stay, homeless, if you didn't have an education, if you wasn't working, that was considered a crime. Now here today, I'm a slave, and 24 hours later, I'm a free man, right? And now I'm put off the plantation, nowhere to go, no education, because you said during my era of slavery, it was against the law for me to be educated. Matter of fact, it was against the law for me to look a white man in the eye.
Tell it.
And so now you come up with a law that says that if I wasn't educated, if I didn't have a job, and if I didn't have a place to stay, I'm committing a crime. So that put black men up under investigation and then labeled as a criminal, and they could come up with this term called convict leasing. Where they were leasing out the convicts for free labor.
Yes, sir.
And preferably, the former slave master would take that slave back and work off. And the slave master with his land would contract with the state to produce, but use the labor of this so-called convict. That's called convict leasing. This is that modern day slavery, the birth of it. See? And so when you talk about criminalizing the race, you talk about laws that Congress passed. They're forbidding people from their full citizenship because the 13th Amendment said, unless convicted of a crime. Right? I got a conviction. In fact, I got a couple convictions. I'm a convicted felon. What that means today is I struggle as a convicted felon with what you call collateral consequences. What I mean by collateral consequences? I'm glad you asked that question. Collateral consequences mean I committed a state case, a state offense, and I got sentenced to a state prison, and I came out on state parole, but I'm penalized on a federal level.
Right.
I didn't break a federal law, I broke a state law, but I'm being penalized federally. How did that look? Based on certain convictions, you can't receive financial aid to go to school. Yeah. Certain convictions, you can't live in public housing, a federal program.
Right.
Or receive Section 8. Or receive subsidized housing. Now we looking at sisters, black women that's coming out of prison convicted of a crime, per the 13th Amendment, per Congress, that because she has a conviction and she's released and someone has handed her children back, and they're telling her because of that conviction she can't get Section 8 to provide housing for her own children. She can't get subsidized housing. Certain public aid benefits she can't even receive because of that conviction. So what is she to do? So now she's faced with a dilemma. See? And there's another term called invisible punishment. This is the punishment that's invisible to you, society. That I can see, but you can't see. How did that look? You might say, well, all they got to do is when they get out is go get a job. Right. If I went to a Home Depot in the morning, and they tell me, well, we can't hire you, Mr. Lee, because you're black. Because of the work of our forefathers that fought for the rights of black people in this country, I can sue them for discrimination. If they say, well, we don't hire you because you're black. If I go and they say, well, we don't hire you because we assume you gay. Because the gay community came together to become a strong voting bloc and forced legislators to pass bills to get them gay rights, I can sue them for discrimination. If they say, well, we don't hire you because you're handicapped. Because the handicapped people came together to fight for their rights. Try going to a public facility and they don't have a handicapped parking space. Right? Or handicapped accessibility. Because handicapped people fought for their rights. But if they tell me, well, Mr. Lee, we can't hire you because you're a convicted felon, I'm unprotected. It ain't nothing I can do. Because the 13th Amendment said, unless convicted of a crime, I can go back in the state of a slave. There's a case that was in Washington, D.C. See, in Washington, D.C., when they come out of prison, they can't vote for 7 years.
Right.
Then they got a petition for their voting rights back. So they took their case all the way to the United States Supreme Court. For those who don't know, that's the highest court in this country. And they ruled that because convicted felons, and they use the term ex-offender, are not recognized as a class upon the Voting Protection Act, that they couldn't rule in their favor. That they suggest that they move to become a recognized class upon that act, and then they could rule in their favor and say it's criminal or against the law or the Constitution if they deny their rights to vote. There are some states in this country where a convicted felon can't vote after they get conviction, period. No more. But because of the legislation in Illinois, the day a person can walk out of prison, he can vote. People in the county jail can vote because they ain't convicted yet. They in the judicial system. See, the criminal justice system has two divisions to it. You got the adult division and the juvenile division. They're the only two divisions in the criminal justice system. Then you got the Illinois Department of Correction here in Illinois. That's prison. Then you got the Department of Correction. That's the county jail. The Illinois Department of Correction is the penal system. Meaning you've been convicted and penalized, and you're part of the prison system, and when you come out, you're on parole, and if you violate, they send you back to prison. Not in front of a judge. It's over with. That day is over. It's back to prison. The judicial system. And you hear the word judge under that. The judicial system means you're still in court. If you're on probation or supervision, you're still in court. The judicial system. If you violate, you back in front of a judge. And if he penalize you, revoke it, and give you some time, then you go into the penal system. And you know, you got some parole agents that don't know that system. You got social workers and agencies that work with formerly incarcerated and convicted people and do not understand that system. That's a problem. How can I advocate for you when I don't understand your circumstances? See? So we talking about some miseducation going on here. See? So when you look at crime, crime is not an isolated act. Crime is a social act. In order for an area to become a crime-infested area, you have to first have criminals, right?